Welcome, fellow wizards, to the IGA Lunch Hour. In this unstructured open forum, we sit down to eat together and chat with members of the Indie Game Academy community, as well as members of the game industry. We cover how to start indie game studios, as well as video game design, development, and more. This is an unedited recording of a weekly event we host on our Discord on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, so stop by for the next one. I'm your host, Willem Delventhal, headmaster of the Indie Game Academy, and joining us today is none other than Viktor Blanke, who has been a professor for us in the past on visual design and is an art director at Mojang, freaking Minecraft. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you, Viktor, and it's so wonderful to have you on the show. I've got to ask you, what are you having for lunch today?
Thank you, William. Thanks for inviting me back to talk a bit more. Lunch?
Yeah, absolutely.
What did I have for lunch today? I had cereals. Actually, it was a bit of a boring lunch.
Nice.
But yeah, really good to be back, and it was really fun. Last time around, my first lecture with you guys, seeing all the cool ideas and getting to present some of my process and thought process, creative process, and some of my work in some of this. So yeah, really exciting to be involved with this community.
Absolutely. So excited to have you. It was such I love those teachers that we bring in where everybody just really has a good time and walks away with a lot. And I think your lecture was one of those. So thank you for giving your time in the first place, and very excited to have you as a part of the community as well. So we talked a little bit about some of the topics we want to cover today. In majority, we want to talk about basically art leadership, what it looks like to be an art director. And then we also want to talk about ideation, since that's one of the parts that everybody always cares about and something that I personally really love talking about. So let's start, though, just about you, Viktor. Can I get sort of the intro to who Viktor is? The Viktor Blanke synopsis.
So I'm a Swede. I was born and raised here in Stockholm, in Sweden. Played a lot of video games growing up, as you do. I kind of grew up in the era of Nintendo 8-bit, Super 16-bit, and Amiga 500 here. So that's kind of my roots in gaming. So I'm been playing video games all my life. I think growing up, I never really thought of it as something to move into as a career. So I studied more in graphic design and film, and later on illustration, and sort of worked more in those areas. Moved to the UK and worked with animation for TV and some gaming related things, but more on the kind of promotional side. And in Australia for a while, kept working in animation and visual design there, and then got an opportunity to move back to Sweden. So I moved back home and started working with EA Dice here on sequel to Mirror's Edge, Star Wars, and a bunch of other games, and with Mojang since about a year back now. Yeah, it's a fun medium to work in. I think I sort of jumped at the chance to be able to come into working with games. I think it's a lot of different things that I think is fun in other mediums too, and it sort of adds other areas of complexity. Essentially building software in terms of you can also design characters and work with storytelling and fun game loops. So I think for me, games are not escapism. I think it's an opportunity to communicate and emotions and maybe raise awareness as well. I think for issues and sort of things that are happening, and I think those are the things that resonates with me very strongly. The staying power of the game is has more to do with what the content are and what the story is and what the world is and what you do as a player and kind of why ultimately it matters. So that's the short one.
That's amazing. I love I think anybody who is here who's already familiar with the Indie Game Academy can hear some of the same sentiments that we care about here. So it makes sense that we wound up working together, that you're talking with us right now. I love your sentiment about about what video games can be and how they can affect other people and what a beautiful art form they are. I'm not sure if we've talked about this, and I'm not remembering, but I think other people will be interested too. This is one of the things that our students and community consistently ask about. How did you make that first transition? So you're studying film and a couple of other things, and then you wound up working at DICE. Was that the first industry job? And then how did that first industry job happen? Game industry.
Yeah, I would say the first kind of big one. I worked a bit in mobile games, but like very like pre-iPhone. It was kind of some of the first color phones, and that one I think came from, it sort of came from like web design and graphic design and illustration and Flash, like in terms of animation. So, and the people who were, this maybe what 2001. So there weren't really any applications, not even in 3D art and stuff. Like most people were self-taught, so it's more kind of, you sort of have at the time fairly small body of work, but at least a portfolio to show, and then 22, and then we made some. Was there for about so working on very early mobile games, which was kind of fun. But I think it was also a little bit ahead of its time, before app stores and now it's mobile games are crazy huge. I haven't worked on mobile games really since, but I think with I started actually there working with UI art, and I think that kind of came from I had worked with leaning into like UI and UX and graphic design and motion graphics. Was kind of the strength that I had a bit of experience in those areas, although not in games, but maybe before iPad app or websites or motion graphics for TV, and came in, and then I sort of
It sounds like you had it sounds like you had you had a portfolio of stuff that you had worked on, even if it wasn't bigger projects. It sounds like you had some applicable experience that you could convince these people that you had experience and show that you had experience in an area that was applicable and still valuable in the game industry. And then I'm also curious, how did you find that first job listing? Was it through a friend? Did you cold apply? Was it on a website somewhere? How did you find it?
I think the very first one, the mobile one, was from just applying to different jobs.
Nice.
So before that, I was working for a .com company. There was a big sort of growth in internet, and like the .com bubble burst back then. 2000, I think. So the company I actually worked for, they downsized quite a lot, and they sort of grown too fast. So I was looking for new jobs. That was one that I just applied for and got called in for an interview. So definitely one way to go about it. I think with DICE, it was also a role that I saw sort of advertised. I was in Australia at the time, and I was looking at what jobs what the jobs are for in Sweden. So then I applied there. So I think definitely like keeping an eye on the job listings.
What's exciting about that? I mean, obviously you were really early in the process, really early in the game industry. I mean, so there were fewer people actually applying, but at the same time, all you did was apply for jobs, and you had a portfolio and a backlog of experience that you could show people. So, that's great. For all of you who are still trying to figure out how to break in, that's how it works, and it takes some time. We're talking though about art direction and ideation. So why don't we jump into art direction? This is another category that people here really care about because they just don't know this information yet. What does an art director actually do, Viktor? What do you do in your day-to-day? And how do you actually engage with the creation of a video game?
I mean, for me, and I think many other art directors, with a team of artists, it can be big team. If it's a AAA, big game, your Assassin's Creed or your Call of Duty or FIFA or what have you, then there's a much bigger down to smaller size teams. the art director on the project sets the the visual direction of the game, and works very closely with concept artists, to visualize it, and show consistency across the project. So the you visualize through concepts or an ideation through mood boards and references that kind of then works through to 3D artists who work with modeling, and then lighting artists who put the lighting in, and who make things move and come alive. It's kind of really working with all the sort of disciplines within art, or UI art, to what does the interface look like, what does the graphic design look like. So I think it's really consistency and making sure it's fun as well. We're making games, so I think it's good to kind of, it's a little bit of I would say chemistry, ensuring that there's a healthy work-life balance, and team health is something I definitely prioritize a lot, that people overscoped and don't have too many things they are assigned to. There's enough time to also that you have enough time, right? I think that's something that's really me, that you get to really iterate and refine your ideas, and that's necessarily always the case. Sometimes you work on productions and things are under time pressure, and things make it, they may actually even get added very late. So I think it's also very much the role of the art director to negotiate, maybe, or like get the time for your team to have that time to be creative and come up with ideas. Some you throw away, some you can hone in on and refine. So it's very much working with producers and other stakeholders around you, or if you're in another setup, I think planning out your budget, basically, so how can you get them more time. If you're
that's a whole budget. Yeah, that's a whole other department of game development that a lot of fresh developers don't think about at first. I want to remind everybody who's here, I'm going to turn Viktor over to all of you to ask questions in just a second. So if you have questions for Viktor as we go, make sure to drop them in the Garden Chat channel there in the chat in the top right. It sounds to me, a follow-up question for you, it sounds to me like a lot of what you do is sort of creative center point, like creative, you're the eye of the storm. You're the person that brings all of the creative work into one understandable vision. Is that accurate? And then secondary question, how much management do you actually do? Are there other people like a producer or a project manager or something who's doing the management, or is that your job? You're managing the art team?
That's I'll start with the last one. So it depends a little, I think, on the setup of the team. Usually, in the studios I worked in, you also have people managers who it is solely their role to be a people manager to artists. There's like an overlap there in terms of what I do, but I think that combination is good when you have a craft manager, and then the art director can a little bit more in the vision, holding the vision and building out the vision, and articulating the art direction as well. I think it's a kind of continuous job to build out documentation and guidelines and refine them, and then it's of course coaching as well, making sure. I think that's the best leadership, is when you sort of empower people, and then and it's maybe a bit of situational leadership as well. Like some people, some artists like more to get more feedback and more frequently. Some prefer to kind of you sort of agree where you set out upon, and then you have a bit of a handshake, and then they want to kind of run free and sort of check in at a later point. So I think it's also like understanding the people that you're working with, and how they prefer to work, and kind of adapting your leadership.
I love that. One of the best pieces of management advice I ever received is your job as a manager is not to keep people on task, it's to unblock your team. So it's making sure that they are moving forward in their best way, and it's not, trying to be a taskmaster or anything like that.
Yeah,
So
definitely. I think
definitely. Oh, go ahead.
empowering teams,
Mm-hmm.
and also in terms of decision making, it's
Mm-hmm.
you can become a bottleneck quite easily as yourself as an art director if sit and review and approve everything. So I think approving the team to have autonomy and a bit of ownership of what they do really like helps as well. Of course, you need to still be the person who holds their vision.
Mm-hmm.
But I think over time, like building a team that feels empowered and
Yeah.
can act on things within their groups, it speeds things up, and it gives people more ownership over what they do as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. So last question before I hand you off to the community. Um, we talked about ideation a little bit. I'd love to hear. This is a process that I am so curious about. It's my favorite part of the process. It's something that I am professionally interested in. What is your ideation process? How do you contribute, and how do you bring your team from ideation to chosen concept?
One of my favorite parts of the process too, and I think it's actually changed quite a bit over the last few years. I think with the pandemic and more remote work. So we use tools like Miro, Slack, which Slack is
Mm-hmm.
ages, right? But I think I only started using it in 2017, maybe. So it's
Mm-hmm.
only really 5 years. And then you sort of think back, how you communicated before over emails, and so I think technology helps in terms of organizing and structure it. And yeah, like I mentioned, Miro is a great visual tool. I think I did for some aspects of ideation, I do like the physical presence of being in a room and using things to Miro where you look at references together and can draw things on whiteboards and stuff. But I think
Mm-hmm.
it's also embracing the new world of remote. So there are great tools for it, and hybrid can kind of work pretty well there too, with uh, coming together at key moments, and then also using like virtual tools for it. But I think brainstorming, definitely, like I think you need also a bit of a framework for brainstorming. So agreeing a little bit on what the boundary that you're coming up with is. Because it can get a bit overwhelming, right? If it's very blue sky, is that the word, blue sky?
Mm-hmm.
Pie in the sky, maybe. When you're like,
Yeah.
it could be any game, it could be this, it could be that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so if you're like, look at like some constraints of we have X amount of time, these are the people on the team. Maybe, I think also like collective passion in there, like what is the game that we collectively want to build? Is it a point and click adventure, say,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have an idea of a genre, right? And then you can come up with from there start extrapolating, what are the characters, what's the time era, what's the storyline, what's the gameplay that you want to tell, what you want the players to experience. So mind mapping, I think, is another one that's really good there, of extrapolating keywords, and then you can from there
Mm-hmm.
on like go layers down. So that's another useful exercise. Um, there's a lot of good facilitation for workshops of sort of time boxing people. Everyone comes up with ideas. You cluster your ideas, and then you do another set of ideation based on those, so you can sort of iterate within. That works really well as well. And
Love
then I
that.
think being art, then starting to visualize things, to move on concepts and simple sketches that kind of then you start taking something more already a little bit more concrete, which is
Mm-hmm.
and then going into prototyping and building out what the gameplay is.
I may at some point, Victor, pester you again Because I am slowly writing a book about this exact topic because I just find it so fascinating, and a lot of this is really cool. I was just looking up mind mapping. I was looking up a couple of other things that you mentioned. This is great. I want to make sure that our students have our community has a chance to ask you questions, though. I can't hog you the whole time. So first, I think let's bring up Misha. Misha is asking about Siggraph, which is looks like an online convention that you might enjoy, Victor. Want to jump up, Misha?
Yeah, no, yeah, Michelle. Yeah, definitely familiar with Siggraph. I've never been. I have watched some talks there, and I have former peers who have gone there. Usually, folks on the engineering side, kind of working with rendering tech and so on. I think my impression of Siggraph is that it's a little bit more technical. Um, but yeah, it's one of those. It'd be really cool to go. There's I think you guys in the US in the US you have a lot of I've been to GDC, but you also have SXSW right in Austin and Siggraph. So there's a lot of don't have as many. I think unfortunately in Europe there's a Nordic Games Summit I think in Sweden, and there's Gamescom, but that's more like E3 type kind of trade show. But for more for sort of developers and community coming together, I think there's some really good conferences in the US.
Yeah, that's awesome. If people aren't already doing this, going to conventions either online or in person is one of the best things you can do for yourself, both like professional growth and then also networking. So huge. Let's jump into some more of these questions, though. Make sure we get through a few. So, Rick, do you want to ask about assets from artists?
Yeah. So when you're requesting the assets from the artists and whatever they give you, sometimes it's not always like going to fit with the art direction exactly. I'm curious what your iterative process is like. Like when you see it, how do you suggest the changes? Do you personally make changes ever? Do you try to you mentioned coaching, so like do you try to explain to the artist the algorithm, or do you just have a few people who already thoroughly understand it and they can just do a final refining? Or I'm curious, like what that looks like, getting the deliverable to the final version.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think how they're different, to the very individuals. I guess it sort of depends a little bit, if they're like you say, most of your team is well versed working in a style, but it's something like doesn't really fit the tonality, or you feel like you could third and it's usually kind of very open form of feedback. I think we work as a group as well, so you can leverage other artists or other leads as well, if it's something within a specific area. But something I think that works really well if you work with concept artists is doing paint overs. So say you have a level and you want to or kind of make the mood and the tonality feel different, then you sort of paint over the geometry and the level, and it's either I would sometimes do it with a concept artist, and I think definitely like doing the as well. So then you sort of yeah, you're refining something rather than like, no, this is wrong and we need to redo it, or it's usually the case of you want to kind of take something further and make it fit more within to like the specific part of the game, and I think that's generally the way to do it, is to kind of iterate with the artist and then bring other artists in as well who can bring
So it's kind of
it's
when you make the changes, you give it that, like you do it in front of all the other artists so that they can learn the process as you do it.
times, yes, and then sometimes with some artists it's very quick, like one to one, and you sort of bouncing things back and forth. I think a lot of the time they need feedback. Is it like do more of this or more of that? The difficult, and it hasn't happened many times, but the times that has happened where it's like it's completely not fitting the style or the universe, then I think you have to take back a step, and maybe you didn't explain something quite correctly, and you didn't onboard them to certain things. So then I think going back and showing examples from, if you have them, of other things, if you're working within something that maybe has existing examples. If you're coming up with something that's like completely new, then I think it's a bit trickier. Then you're basically kind of following your inner, not your inner voice maybe, but what the image that you have in your mind, and you're trying to visualize it, and then it become a bit more tricky. It's harder to point maybe to something that's like, oh, it doesn't feel quite right, but then you also don't really have something that so I think it really depends a little bit on the situation, but I think giving sort of detailed, not overly detailed feedback, but the feedback. So I try to, I think, also being concise in your feedback, and maybe picking out 3 things instead of 15 things. I think like these 3 things, and we tweak them, and then you do another round of iteration, and yeah, that's a good process.
That's really interesting. I sort of have wound up acting something like an art director, definitely not even close to approximating it, but I'm a game designer on a small team, so I wear many hats. And I often give briefs on art assets that we need, and then therefore often have to negotiate, walk the line of needing changes on those art assets later. And it's definitely, it doesn't feel like I have found the perfect way of doing it yet. Rick, you have a second question, though, about specifications for art assets.
Yeah. This conversation leads right into this question. So whenever you're requesting the assets from your team member, how do you convey what you need, like the specifications for the asset itself, the technical specs, and also just like the feel, the mood? Do you have a document template, or do you have a less formal process?
Start with a sort of more of a brief that kind of outlines what is it that we want to do, with concepts, reference materials, and then that's sort of what you work from. Also taking into account, you probably in those instances like with so what's the gameplay as well. So you're not just building, say, I don't know, a table, but like what's the scene like? Will the player interact with it? Will there be props on there? And where does it fit in? So I think giving as much information as you can in a brief definitely really helps. So yeah, documentation, and then it can be less formal. If there are things on the fly, but I think if it's bigger chunks, and maybe this depends on a little bit on how you. Say you start a 2-week sprint, and you're setting out to build this feature, sprint. Then I think having like a good brief, a good collective understanding of what it is that you're doing, or transmitting your thoughts to that person, that really helps.
I love that.
Thank
Surya, yeah, definitely. Surya, do you you want to jump in and ask your question about bottlenecking, because this is such a good one, such a juicy question.
I can read that also for Surya.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, like, at what point do you realize, since you mentioned like being a director, being can be a bottleneck for your team in case you are doing too much of the approval or having to write too many of the specs. So at what point do you realize that you might be becoming a bottleneck for your team? And what steps do you take to kind of restore autonomy to your artists and have them use their creativity and self-direction to take the work forward faster?
That's it's a great question. I think you kind of your own workload, when and you're like, okay, now there's too many things going on, and then and you also, I guess, notice it like maybe process working as it's intended, or are you doing too many iterations on something, or is there simply like the volume of work is too much for a person to handle? Then that's definitely something you want to avoid. I think both for like your own, but also for the artists. So I think definitely like leveraging other people, senior artists or other leads on the team. So if there are things that they can, everything needs to go through you. But just sign off on work, or give feedback as necessary. So I think kind of seeing it a little bit early. Maybe it's also looking at when you're coming closer to delivering certain things in the game. It's going to be more hectic than planning a little bit ahead to make sure that you have a structure where you can delegate to other people to go out.
It's really hard. I find it so hard to delegate like the approval or design process. Do you have tips on how to do that?
Yeah, it's a tough one because you wanna definitely be involved, right? Like otherwise, you can also feel like, oh, when do you like release control? I think it's definitely like it's as not walking a fine line, but it's kind of finding a good balance of when do you need to be involved and when can the team work more autonomously and consult you. I think the start of the creative process is kind of key for me. The start and the end, the middle is usually things kind of tug along. But if you set out and you have wider alignment on what you're doing at the start, and you spend a little bit more time there to land in what you're doing, definitely helps down the line. And then I think you always get to a point where there's a lot of things going on and there's a lot of things being coming into the game, and it is a little bit more hectic. And then I think having that structure where a little bit like what are the most important things that I need to focus on, and what are things that I can actually we're in a good enough place, and someone else can with these areas. So it's a fine line, because you can become very creatively and emotionally invested in what you're doing, and you want to be part of everything, but it can also you don't want to very I don't know, crazy hours, right? You want to have a work for yourself.
Absolutely. Does that answer your question, Surya?
Yeah, I can totally relate with the getting emotionally invested in the creative part of things. But yeah, that's a great answer to the question. Being able to kind of delegate the approval process a little bit down the chain, and then kind of supervise only when absolutely necessary. Is that the gist of what you were saying, Victor?
I think so. Like being able to direct a little bit more, and then very more finding where it's more detailed reviews, like maybe things that I don't need to be in if it's but I think yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thanks.
That's a great answer. Yeah, delegating approval is something that I know I still need to work on. Ada, do you want to jump in with your question about remote work? You hear, Ada? I can also ask for you. So, Ada, feel free to jump in. Ada asks, though, do you want me to ask for you? We'll go for.
Sorry, I was on. I'm on my phone, so it was. Yeah. So, as an art director, do you think remote work has made things easier for your team, harder for your team, like managing, not just managing what they do, but also like coming up with the ideas for designs? And like how much of a group effort is like that process, and how has remote work affected that, I guess, is my question.
Many people, it's been good with remote work because you have more flexibility, and if you have a good work setup at home, and you know you're okay being away from people. I think for vice versa, like for other people who want and maybe need more social contact, it can actually be like mentally more detrimental, that you feel isolated, and maybe you move to a new country, and you know your social glue was kind of in the office, right? So then you feel, you know, less engaged, and then you know, so I think it's different for different people, but for me personally, it's been pretty good. I you know, I'm a like introvert extrovert, so I don't mind being alone, but I think also like I try to be in the office now, like um and I think for me that's a good balance. I think, you know, it is good to kind of meet the team, and you know, do certain things in person, but I think it's also good for, I think for many people, that they can have, you know, focus time, and sort of, you know, have a bit of more flexibility around how they plan their work day. If they have like kids to pick up from kindergarten, or you know, then you know, take care of their dog and take the dog for a walk, or you know, go see a doctor, or like that happens in life, right? So I think those are good things, like on a personal level. I think in terms of work, it's probably easier than, you know, we collectively thought before the pandemic. With like Zoom and Teams and Slack and Miro and Discord and all these tools, they've, you know, kind of, you know, helped us. I think it would have been much harder 10, 15 years ago, like to do this switch, that, you know, was kind of, you know, forced upon us with the pandemic. But I think many people and many studios have kind of found that it is actually something that's, you know, many people want this, so that, you know, many studios that go remote. I think creatively, it works. You know, you can definitely have ideation and have, you know, a sort of daily, you know, exchange using, you know, these tools. I do think, you know, my own feeling is like when you do meet people in person, you know, there is a different, you know, energy, and you know, you sort of needing to look at the next, you know, like it's harder to read people maybe in a Teams meeting, right? Or in a Zoom meeting, like where are they looking, and you know, what's their you know, body language, or you know, you sort of sit there and talk and wait for the next person to talk. So I think there are things, you know, that work really well. So maybe a bit of the combination is good. You know, I think it's nice to meet up socially, right? Like outside of work, and I think lots of those things less in you know, in a remote virtual setting, where, you know, so if you have a meeting about something, and then, you know, in an office setting, or in a, you know, studio setting, you're like, oh, let's go grab a coffee and let's keep talking about that thing, and then you have lunch, and then, you know, you come up with another idea. So maybe some of those more so, or you know, like random ideas. That's also like, you know, walking past someone and seeing like, oh, that's really cool. What's that on your screen? What are you working on? And then, you know, you start thinking about it, like, unless, you know, someone connects with you and they're like screen, and then you do a huddle, and you know, there's a few more steps, right, to like just kind of having that uh, spontaneity, I guess is the word that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
But I think it works too. You know, it's I think it'll be a, you know, a future where some things are completely remote, some things are hybrid. I think nothing will go back to being like 100% everyone sitting in the same office. That's my sense anyway.
I like that answer. I think, you know, something that I heard from you is that you should be giving autonomy to your workers. That some people work better remotely and some people work better in person, and some people, you know, it's a spectrum like anything else. We're learning this all together right now, right? There are levels of in-person or remote that work for different people, and expecting one thing or the other from anybody is sort of limiting or hurting your team. Let's jump into the next question. We're getting close to wrap up, but we only have 2 questions left, so I'd like to get them both in. Dylan, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. So, what is your approach when a non-artist on the team wants to contribute art to the game? For example, if the team is approaching a very important milestone and the, say, sound designer has some art skills, but they feel like they aren't really able to effectively make sound effects right now because they're all in there. But there's some art assets missing, but the artists are super busy with this other stuff. And so they want to contribute a little bit of art themselves. They're talented, but they aren't super familiar with the design principles of your pillars and whatnot. Just what's your approach with that kind of situation?
Love that question.
It's a good question. It's a great question. I think it happens super often, but it has happened. And I think when it has happened, it's usually, a game designer who's like, I can make some textures here because I think this is, we won't have time to do without this. And then you're like, cool, for it. And then, you try to find someone that can pair with them, maybe help them, explain the style as a possibility, or, you try to give them the onboarding. Or, if it's, I don't know, someone from QA who's, into graphic design and they want to do some iconography, then I think if it's and people idling or feeling like they're not contributing and they, they sort of reach out and want to try something, I think for me, it's always a positive. I think keep in mind it's like also giving them the right level of support. So going to be able to give them the right amount of, briefing and feedback and stuff like that. If it's a very busy time, that might be the only thing that's a bit, to handle. But overall, I think, if people can contribute and want to contribute, I think it's
It's good to let people contribute if they can, but to a point, not where it would hurt the team. Sort of what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Don't as long as it becomes detrimental to other people, that they
Right.
have to put time to help it.
Put in extra work.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But if it's like, cool, we can make this work, we can find this, this chunk that you can, add to and contribute to, then, definitely, I think it's, then the person is happy and it adds to the quality of the game, probably. So.
Amazing. All right. Well, we got one last question for the day. Gwen, do you want to ask about favorite games?
I wanted to know, what are some of your favorite games in terms of art direction?
So fantastic question. I went through some of them when I did the lecture a couple of weeks ago. So I had some examples there and kind of dissecting their style. So some favorite ones were definitely I'd say, I mean, for me, a personal favorite is a platformer, cinematic platformer called Another World. If you know it, it's I think it's at the time it was sort of went in a very different style and used rotoscoping like Prince of Persia. I think it also paints a very different and nice alien landscape, and the visuals really marry well with and it has some pretty scenes which wasn't super common back then. So that's one personal favorite. Also really like Shadow of the Colossus, which is a Japanese game. Where you basically just fight bosses and ride around on a horse, and it's a very with lots of interesting architecture and color palettes. That's another one. I'm a Zelda fan, so at least one Zelda game has to make it in here. It's probably a tie between Zelda 3 and Breath of the Wild. Zelda 3 I grew up with, and I think it's maybe one of the games that's sort of pinnacle of pixel art on the Super Nintendo. Maybe that one and Secret of Mana, but I think that definitely the Nintendo.
Zelda 3 was A Link to the Past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think Breath of the Wild, I think it's just sort of like Japanese animation and all these really kind of nice effects and the world building. I think that's a really super nice recent example as well.
Lots of great, beautiful games. I
to come up
think
with
for yeah, definitely all the ones we grew up with is always what sticks with us, I feel like. Well, this has been super lovely. I think this is going to wrap us up for the day to make sure we can end on time. But Victor, do you have anything that you want to promote here at the end of the podcast?
No, I think they have great questions. Really great to come in and be able to talk a little bit more, loosely in this format. And
Yeah.
I think keep games and like channel your passion for what it is that you're building, and have fun while you're doing it. Have fun and
Love that.
and enjoy the process with your team. I think it's I personally always think of it as a bit of a privilege to get to work with games. You get to work
Yeah.
with something that you actually like enjoy. I think there's many other work with and study that's to me not so I feel like privileged to be able to work in this medium and being able to reach lots of people. And I think everyone who's of course you obviously feel the same passion. So I think you stick with that passion and have fun while you do. I think it's it's following your inner voice.
I love that sentiment. You're such a pleasure to talk to, Victor, for exactly this reason. You're such a knowledge source, and then also you just have a wonderful perspective on what a privilege it is to work in games and what a wonderful space it can be. All right, that is going to wrap us up for today. Thank you, everybody, for showing up with your questions. Thank you so much, Victor, for being here to answer those questions. If you enjoyed it, we ask that you send this podcast along to just one other person that you think might enjoy it too. Next week, we'll be talking again here on our Discord at 12 p.m. EST. There are instructions on how to join. Otherwise, I will see everybody soon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Victor. Thanks, Will.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Victor.
you.
Thank you.